everyone. My name is Maureen McDowell, and I'm the founder and executive director of Keep St. Pete Lit. We are a literary arts organization based in St. Petersburg, Florida. And this is episode 15 of our weekly online series, Typewriter Talks, where we dive into the minds and brains of local Tampa Bay writers. And today we have the wonderful Lisa Kirchner. Lisa, thank you so much for being here.
Maureen, it's so great to be here with you. And of course, the fact that you exist here in St. Pete is part of the reason why I came to St. Pete.
Oh, that's so wonderful. Lisa is the host of our monthly storytelling show, True Stories. She's also a fiction writer, a playwright. Help me, keep going.
I'm author,
writer,
memoir essay,
writer. Yes.
Journalism. And most recently, I wrote a film.
And a film. So she is a Renaissance woman. So she checks all the boxes as far as a writing career. So tell us what you're working on right now.
So what I'm working on right now is actually an essay. Now, many people who try to publish memoir know that a great help in that is getting essays published in national publications. And my agent just actually put my manuscript, my second memoir, with a publishing house that I'm really excited about. But I mean, fingers crossed, who knows? But it wouldn't hurt to get an essay published. So what I've actually been working on just the last couple of days is an essay sort of loosely based on the book. I wouldn't call it an excerpt at all, but it echoes many of the themes in the book.
So how do you see, with all the different platforms that you use as a writer, do they integrate, or is it really like different parts of your brain that you have to use?
That's a very interesting question, because as I just love the written word, and I actually began as a fiction writer. I got a degree in journalism, and I started working for a museum because I realized immediately I was not a very subjective writer. Like I remember going to cover this senator's speech, and I was like cherry picking the quotes to make him sound dumb because I didn't like him. And I recognized, like, this was back when people had a belief in the objectivity of journalism. I didn't know I could have just, ridden the crest of this trend to become, a pundit on Sunday mornings. And I was like, I got to opt out and do something that allows me to kind of channel this. And so I started working for the Columbus Museum of Art. Meanwhile, I was always working on fiction. I didn't get a degree in creative writing because what am I going to do with that is what I worried. And then I worked in the corporate world, corporate organization. I mean, I was really sort of on the hybrid side, working mostly for arts organizations and education. And then I left in order to write a book about these experiences I had while working overseas for the Carnegie Mellon University. So that sort of is in a nutshell. I never imagined myself as a performer, but the first time I went to Book Expo America, I saw Jodi Picoult, of all people, giving an author talk. And I am not interested in that genre of crime writing or I don't have anything against it. It's just that it doesn't, a true crime, I enjoy watching that more than reading it.
Yeah.
And although nothing's 100%, what I've enjoyed in my pandemic reads has been a surprise to me even. But what happened during the course of her speech was I was like, oh my gosh, I got to get her book. And I really recognized that when authors connect with their audiences, it makes people want to buy the books. And I'm like, if I'm gonna sell some books, I'm gonna have to learn how to actually step out of my comfort zone and talk to people. And so I started telling stories at the Moth. Now, interestingly, this was also in order to edit my book, because I had moved to New York City after living in the Persian Gulf in order to take a lot of classes and start work, because I had been writing fiction and I had been writing journalistic pieces, but not personal. And as you know, the personal is very different. Putting yourself in the story, very different. How can I be revelatory and, you know, still interesting and all that stuff, and not, you know, navel gazing. And so I started telling stories at the Moth and really changed everything. And I got very interested in performative aspects, and not because even as a substitute, it's just they're different. Yeah. So one thing, for instance, I could say if I was telling a story about living in Qatar, I would just go, I'd never be caught in this slutty getup, meaning my shoulders are exposed and, you know, and yeah. And, although that might sound like slut shaming at this point in time, I'm just, you know, back in 2007, that's what I would have said. So, I have definitely, I appreciate the way the different genres make me work. And as you have heard some of my playwriting, I love the kind of collaborative experience of playwright. You write a book and you're all alone, and you know, it can get crazy making when you do a play and you see other people speaking it and acting it in 3 dimensions. It's an interesting collaborative experience. And maybe because I did a lot of corporate communications, I'm good with that process. Like, I don't think like, oh, how dare you change my words? Like, I just, you know, I've seen how that process can make things better. Although poets are always, I remember when I went to Bread Loaf, the poets were always my favorite people. I think that brevity, that precision in speech,
let's get to the point.
Yeah, exactly.
I always want to know the meat in the marrow. What's the point of what you're saying? Get to the point. Yeah. Right. I get it. But it's also what's cool, and you mentioned with playwriting, how that interactive, because as writers, we don't necessarily know what the reader's interpretation is of your writing unless you actually sit down with a reader and they say, oh, I got this out of your book and I got this out of your book. And when you do playwriting, you can kind of see that in person with the actor.
I don't know. I just had a conversation with a friend of mine about this, because she was very concerned that people weren't getting the message out of her book. Listen, I can tell you, hardly anybody got the message out of my book, which was basically that women in the Middle East, especially when it came out, we were in a very open, like, yes, feminism is not an F word anymore. And people did not see that. People couldn't see at all how we still had trouble here. This was before Me Too, right? And that was my big learning, meeting and getting to work with and to know women and men who live there. We just have completely different worldviews, but we share a lot of similarly non-egalitarian views about women. We just hide it better here.
Yeah.
And people didn't really talk about that with my book. That's fine. But that's the thing. There was a great freedom in recognizing that, because then I stopped worrying about whether or not other people are going to get it. I personally don't learn well when people are trying to tell me what to think. Yeah. And so, I have learned it's better to just trust my audience to come up with their own meaning. Mm-hmm. There's not much point in me trying to foist it.
Yeah, I mean,
and the same is true with film. So one of the reasons that I started writing these little short films was because I was like, I have all these great stories for my second memoir, which have been sort of like flourishing, and then, you know, and I thought, why don't I just fictionalize them and make a series of little short films, because they're fun and I can see it, like I could visualize it. And you know, the first one I did, it's a male-female character. It's called My Dinner with Steve, loosely based on many horrible dinner dates that I've been on, but not really grounded in the facts of my experience. But many experiences I shared with other people as well, and had shared with me. And the male character, different people who read it when it was still in the treatment form were like, some of them were like, oh God, he's such a jerk. And others were like, why is she so mean to him? Or why is, you know, and then other people were like, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to think about him. And I'm like, bingo, perfect. That's exactly what I want. Yeah. So I'm not trying to, I think in my experience, when I've read material that tries to villainize someone who's not the narrator, it's not as successful for me. One of my favorite reviews of my first book on Amazon just is this excoriating, like, she's a horrible person. And I was like, because how easy would it have been to make, you know, the Middle East or the patriarchal culture the bad character in my book, right?
That's one piece of writing advice, you know. She's a bad person, and you're like, pat yourself on the back. What is that like? What is that? A critique is nothing is bad publicity, even bad critiques. Get your word out.
I don't know about that, but you know, I mean, what do you think? Do you read the comments on your published work?
Oh gosh. You know, I'm thinking about that because I've gone through a period with Growing Keep St. Pete Lit. My writing's kind of been dormant. I've still been writing, but having my work out there, and now it's getting out there again. And I'm a little like, well, you know, I'm just gonna take the writing in the same way I take the organization. It's for service, and it's what I need to do, and I'm gonna keep doing it. And you know, I think you just do your best, and if you have to write, you have to write.
When is your book coming out?
Well, my third book will be out hopefully this fall. So, but my first two books have been in boxes in my house, and I'm just getting it back out there and getting my website up again. And it was very tied up with my marriage, which ended a long time ago, but that's a whole other interview. I could interview myself, right?
I believe it. I mean, that's my whole first book.
Is interviewing yourself? Yeah.
No, the end of
the end of a marriage. Yeah,
marriage.
It's a long marriage. So I'm on the other side of it. So now it's time to get the writing out again. So tell us about a typical day as a writer for you.
Well, I actually I write very much like any kind of a job, and I've just always sort of been that way. Like I was that unusual student who would kind of prepare. I made deadlines always. Like you don't miss a deadline. In journalism school, I was taught the practice at the Ohio State University where I went was it's a letter grade off if you miss the deadline, and that means if you're late for class. Like they were not messing around.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really important practice to be in, because what I found as someone who has never strictly just been a writer, in other words, I have always had to have multiple sort of ways to earn a living. And what that practice has enabled me to do is like, I just keep plodding along, and eventually, and if so, when things come up, as they always do, like it doesn't derail my ability to get to where I'm going. So I do it like a regular job. I do know that my most productive time for writing is in the morning. So I hold it really sacred. People are often like, oh, let's get a coffee. Let's do this or whatever. Let's do a breakfast, something or other. And I'm just like, no, I can't. I can't. And I think people are often like, well, why? What are you doing? It's like, that is the time.
Yeah.
That's my time. Like in the afternoons, much better for admin, much better for other types of things that I might be working on. You know, and sometimes more like a morning, I have to do something that's not related to writing. It's okay, because I'm making that progress. One of my teachers was fond of saying, the plumber doesn't wait for the muse. And as writers, we should be the same. Yeah. And I think that's true. I mean, if I only sat down to write when I was inspired, and you have posted about this, you know, you must find time to write every day, then I wouldn't, I think that it's easier to tighten up that writing. I mean, you know, how many hours does it take to write anything? I can't spend too much time at it.
Yeah, I mean, I find myself, I have an hour and a half to 3 hour window. And I don't know if that shifted because I had a child, and an hour and a half was as long as a DVD. And I mean, I used to have like, I had my job and then I'd just go all day long and just write. But, you know, I have the similar schedule to you, morning, and then I'll go swim at the pool a couple days a week. And then the afternoon is administrative work. And but I want to be like right out of the dream state when I sit down to write. I don't want I don't want society or the outside world too much in my space when it's time.
Exactly right. Exactly right. And one of the tricks that I use when I'm writing longer pieces, particularly, is toward the end of my session, however long that is. And I still have the good fortune, we're 100% empty nesters here. There's, Paul's kids aren't here.
Yeah.
We have a dog. Like that's pretty easy schedule wise. But so I can get longer stretches to write. But then sometimes I have an hour or less. Honestly, if I have less than an hour, I'm liable to do something else, truthfully, because I get distracted if I feel like I'm really in a rush. And a lot of writers really write well under panic and pressure, and I'm not one of them. I will start. I'll continue on a thought without making it even like words. It'll sort of be like, and then the lead character goes home and visits with blah, and whatever it is, so that I know, and when I sit down, I can just sort of slide right back into it.
So you set yourself up for the next day.
Yeah, that is the ideal. I mean, the worst part, and I don't know how. The worst part is when you're in the editing mode and you have to blow something up in order to bring it back together, and you can get lost and you lose the thread, and you wonder if the story makes any sense. It's horrible. You should never write anything. You should just pack it in and quit. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that happens.
Oh yeah.
Pretty much in anything that I blow up. So for instance, what I'm going to read here is something that I had a certain way, and then I did it a different way, and then I blew it up again, And that's just, how many is it right now? About 2,600 words. I'm not going to read all 2,600 words because it's 3 to 5 minutes. I know my damn timing, but that's how it goes.
Yeah, it's kind of like doubt always creeps in. Maybe for any creative, you think you've nailed it. Like, I've got it figured out. I know how to do this. I'm in it. And then it's like, the next book comes around and the next time and you're back. It's like you're a kid all over again. Like, do I know how to ride a bike? Will people laugh at me riding a bike? You got to just keep writing. That's the thing. You got to keep at it. And then that's what's good about a daily practice. It keeps the wheels greased. You show up. It's like any relationship. You got to show up for it. So
exactly.
So what are some of your major themes?
I would definitely say, major themes include relationships and the intersection of kind of dysfunction and technology on relationships, and but also addiction is there a lot, which is really funny because I think it's funny, but a lot of times people are like, oh, I'll drink to that. Like, there's so many exhortations to drink.
Yeah.
And just sort of wellness in general, like self-care, kind of new agey woo-woo, but not too far. I don't take it too far, again, because I don't want to be writing in a prescriptive way. So I like plot. I like stories, and I like stories that illustrate what I am hoping to achieve. Does it illustrate the same thing to you as to me? Well, all you have to do is sit down and recount last family Thanksgiving meal with one of your siblings, and holy shit, were we in the same place?
Yeah. That hits kind of close to home. That's funny. So what are you led by plot? Are you led by setting? Are you led by the characters when you write?
No, I'm definitely led by the emotional experience of it for the characters. So it's not even the characters, because a character quirk could be something that drives a story, but it's more the emotional relationship that the character has to the scene, the other person. I mean, my second book is called Blissful Thinking, and it's got a long subtitle, as they all seem to, but it's basically how 5 trips, 10 years, and all the wrong questions finally worked. And
awesome, I love it.
And it's about really the 10 years that I spent like going back and forth to India looking for answers to like the question that I had coming out of my terrible ending of my marriage in the Persian Gulf, which was, you know, what is so wrong with me?
Ah. Did you find the answers? We'll have to read the book, right?
Indeed. Well, I was asking the wrong question.
Oh yeah, I get that. I just read a book recently, and it basically reframed a question I had, and I realized, whoa, I've been coming at it from the ego instead of coming at it from a heart-centered place, and I shifted it, and I felt everything change, and it was like, thank you, book. Which I had read.
I feel like what happens, it's not just me feeling that way. What stories enable us to do is to examine how we would have responded in the same situation, and really see then from a more empathetic or even more judgmental point of view our own selves. It's easier to do that with somebody else's story than with our own. Mm-hmm. Like if somebody says to you, you know what, Maureen, you're running that Keep St. Pete Lit all wrong, you're going to be like, hell no, I'm not, step back. But if they say, oh my gosh, you know, I was trying to run this nonprofit without hiring a CEO and it was the biggest mistake I ever made, you're going to be like, tell me more, mm-hmm. you know?
Yeah. Both of those things have happened.
I'm just, you know, my woo-woo side would say, I'm picking up your vibe.
Through Zoom. That's funny. So what would be your nope, that's not, I don't want that question yet. What would you tell your younger writer self? What would be the advice you would give to your younger writer self?
Gosh. I don't know, because, you know, I always was a writer. When I was a kid, I used to like stage little, and that's the funny thing. I used to, okay, now I guess I do know what it would have been. I used to stage little plays for my parents that I would write. I would make popsicle stick characters and do this sort of like thing. I have a shoebox as the stage, and I would do. I probably would have encouraged myself to be fearless around the idea of theater and performance. I was very worried about being popular when I was a kid because we moved a lot growing up. And I didn't want to be popular because I necessarily liked the popular kids. I just knew if I was going to spend 1 year, 2 years in this place, I would rather be popular than made fun of all the time because, you know, so it was not like, there's nothing admirable about it, but it also wasn't totally conniving. It was more like just my own comfort level.
Self-preservation. It was your way of,
And so, like, I know all these people who found all this, like, warm and fuzzy goo-goo by doing, like, theater or band or whatever, but I was like, I have to try and be a cheerleader. I don't care about sports ball. You know what I mean? I was the world's worst. Like I had no idea what was going on the film, you know, right? We're cheering now. Yay, yay, yay.
Go team. Yeah.
Yeah. Go you team. Oh, that was the other team that did that. Sorry, never mind. You know, I was terrible. But yeah, I would have gotten, it would have been interesting and asked for more help, really.
That's what's lovely about our community here in St. Petersburg. Like there really is an intermingling between the theater and film and you know, we know actors and actresses, and we know people that just write regularly. We know people that are doing multiple, like Tamara Lush is like works for AP and then also does romances and now doing cozy mysteries. So that it's great to be in that kind of cross-pollination community.
Yeah, and like I said, when I first visited here, I could see that there was a very supportive, creative community. Even if I didn't know you by name at that moment, you know, the all the people who are part of it contribute to that fact.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really It's a special place. I feel very lucky, and that's why I wanted to start this series, because I've always wanted to interview writers, and I was like, wow, this is the perfect way to like, and also like show that everybody does things differently. Like there isn't like one right way to be a writer, and at any age, and you can have a full-time job or not have a full-time job. So there's all different ways to come about this calling. So what are you reading right now, and who are some of your favorite writers?
Oh boy, those are two kind of different questions. So, I mean, some writers that had huge impacts on me at various times, which is not the same as my favorite writers. I I used to read books over and over again when I was younger. I haven't done that. I don't watch movies over again either. And it's not because there's not something to learn, although I will return to a text and be like, how did she or he do that? Right. But it's not the same as reading the whole thing from cover to cover. You know, I absolutely, there's different. So like, I loved like Paul Auster and D.H. Lawrence and writers like that. And even, you know, the Russian writers, Dostoevsky, Kafka. And I loved Kurt Vonnegut when I was a kid. Like I loved a lot of the sort of male canon, as it were. But as an older, you know, and particularly with moving into memoir, like I have had to really kind of immerse myself in that world. And I read, I mean, I love Cheryl Strayed's book, Wild. It feels almost like embarrassing to admit it because it's so popular. But wow, I mean, her writing is just so good. And, you know, but then I love, there was a book called Cupcake Brown about an attorney whose actual name was Cupcake Brown, which was also a massively popular book, but I loved it. And then I have loved, you know, small books that nobody ever heard of, like, oh gosh, why am I blanking on the name of this book? I'm looking behind me like it's going to be there and it's not. So I have this tendency of, I used to buy books and leave them places, particularly if I like them. Mm-hmm. And the only books that I keep anymore are ones that are signed because I've moved so many times as an adult.
Oh yeah, but I'm no joke.
Pardon me?
Moving books is no joke.
It's no joke. And I also, you know, I like to travel generally, and I love to have a lot of books with me. So I really am a big ebook fan. But you know, I loved oh gosh, this book called I'm Down, which was a memoir I read recently, not recently, probably in the past 8 years or something. And just recently though, I read, I mean, Ann Patchett is also a remarkable writer. She wrote, I think the book's called Diary of a Face, but I could be confusing that. No, that is the name of the book written by the woman with whom she had this friendship that she wrote about in this book. Title is escaping me, but it was so good. And then she recently wrote a book called The Dutch House, which was fiction. And I just loved it. I read this romance book recently, which I didn't know was a romance book. I just read the title and I thought, well, that sounds fun. And it's called Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine. And I thought, well, there's pandemic reading right there. Yeah. But it's not really a typical romance. And by the way, Tamara Lush is an incredible writer as well, someone local, but and also a romance writer. In addition to now she's added the mystery genre. Mm-hmm. So you know, you never know what is going to appeal to you. And you know, I recently tried to pick up a science fiction book. I do have a real fondness for science fiction, and it was a book that people said, oh, it's so great. And I'm not going to name it because I don't want to diss anybody. Not that this person cares. They're famous. It's a female writer though. And it was just like, oh, it was trying so hard to be so literary. So, I mean, you know, I guess my tastes are pretty pedestrian.
I think it just depends where you are. Like, I'm really wanting light books right now. Like,
Yes.
I just read this romance about a bookshop in England and finding love in a bookshop. And there was points of it I was like, okay, but then I was like, I just kept reading because I needed something distracting and light.
Yeah.
So I think it just depends, and even popular writers' books. There's a reason they're popular.
Right.
Just because they're popular doesn't mean I think that the reading public isn't educated. I think there's a reason that it has a universal appeal, like Cheryl's book, Wild. So
Right.
it was perfectly timed for a specific period in time that a lot of women were kind of going like, I need more in my life, than what
Yeah, but it's also not, it doesn't make that mistake that I feel like so many women's memoirs do, which you don't get in a man's. I mean, like Nick Flynn has written beautiful memoir, but they have much more latitude to be A, jerks, and B, single in their stories, and independent actors in their lives. And I like that is the narrative arc in her book. That's one of the things that I love about it, that it is about her own reckoning, not how it was influenced, because, I mean, obviously there's a relationship with the guy in there, but the main influence is the relationship with her mother.
Yeah.
And that comes out very, very strongly.
So when you get blocked, what are some of the ways that you get yourself unstuck? Where do you go for inspiration?
Well, I actually love looking at weird things to get inspired. So in New York, when I lived in New York for those many years, there were certain shops where I would go where they had these curious collections of weird things, and in person or to a museum.
Yeah.
or here, I think we're really blessed because all I have to do is go outside and I'm going to see something weird, some kind of a weird bug or plant or even person.
That's so Florida.
Yeah, it's just different. And so it, and like I said, when I'm writing longer pieces, I have a theme already, and the way that I stay in it is kind of by sort of setting myself for success, so I don't get the block. The bigger blocks are when I'm in the middle of editing and I've just like lost the plot, and I'm like, oh, this is terrible. Why am I even doing this? Then it's not so much about I need to be inspired. I need to put on my big girl pants and just sit down and just wrangle it back into some kind of shape.
Yeah. That makes sense. So one more question, and then we'll have you share some of your work. What is your holy grail piece of writing advice?
Don't question yourself constantly.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's a good one. That'll derail you in and of itself. You'll never get
What's your holy grail piece of writing advice?
Oh, wow. That's a good one. What is my holy grail piece of writing advice? Right. I always love the idea that there's only one you, and that if you don't put down on the page what you're meant to put on the page, no one else will do it. And I think that's why it's important that if you're called to write, to do it, because no one's going to write my poetry, and if I don't put it in the world, it's never going to exist. So, and there's a quote, I'm tying in a quote from is it Merce Cunningham, the dancer?
Merce. Yeah.
Merce, yeah. You'll never be pleased at any time. It's not your business to decide if it's good or not. Your business is to put it out there, and that's your job. So I think that that's kind of my ruling, because I put poetry out there, and I don't know if it works or not, but it's what I have to offer. And I know I want to be a poet, and I am a poet, so I just keep at it and keep your head down and write. That's what Gail Massey, who we just interviewed, she said, just keep your head down and write.
And the fact is, you're going to change your mind. You might feel a certain way about this thing you're writing about today. 10 years later, you might feel completely different about it. Well, you know what? Write a new piece.
Yeah. Yeah. But I'll have poems that I've written 10 years ago, and they heal me and help me now. So I always say, like, past Maureen is helping present Maureen. And so who knows?
Sometimes when I look at journal entries from when I was like a teenager, I'm like, I was so much smarter then. I was like a take no bullshit kind of teenage girl in my journal.
You're still kind of take no bullshit too. So you haven't changed that much, knowing you. So, all right. So you want to share some of your writing with us?
Yes. So this is this is the start of that essay that I was telling you about, which also has a subtitle, mostly because I feel like anything that's a little bit arty, nobody's ever going to buy the story because they need people to click on it right away. So my title is Divining the Stars with My Mother, How Visiting Psychics Taught Me I Was My Mother's Daughter.
I love it. I would click. So I'm clicking right now. I'm ready to read it.
See, you're clicking on the second line though, not Divining the Stars with My Mother, right?
Go ahead.
It relates to the piece. The last time I saw a fortune teller was just after my mother died. I was passing by Cassadaga, a northern Florida town that bills itself the psychic capital of the world. She'd have loved it here. Or would she? It's hell, she just might say of the country environments, similar to ones in which we'd been raised, without the amenity of sidewalks. Though we'd made no pact about reaching out from the afterlife, I'd begun to suspect she was trying. How could I resist this mecca of mediums? As far as my memory stretched, Mom loved all things predictive. Even as an 8-year-old child, I didn't have her faith, yet somehow conned her into taking me along to see Miss Lorena in Greensburg. Miss Lorena wasn't the only medium we ever saw over the years, but we saw her with some regularity. Over the course of my family's many moves, we often circled back to this declining Rust Belt area. That Mom spent the money delighted me almost as much as the precious time alone these visits afforded with her. And despite my skepticism, I loved the chance to dream of a future with a fraction of my mom's brains or beauty. Mom had thick black hair she wore closely cropped, accentuating her high cheekbones, only slightly less sharp than her tongue. She wore big hats, leopard prints, and bright red lipstick. Between my pale hair and skin, and even in one of our matching outfits, I felt like her phantasmagoric reverse image. We scheduled our appointments back to back in Miss Lorena's converted closet, a sparse room dominated by a folding card table that held a crystal ball. Much as I enjoyed the adult feeling of my own appointment, I lived for our post-session chats. It was the closest Mom came to doling out maternal advice. What did she tell you? She'd ask on the long drive home.
Oh my gosh, I love that. Your cigarette reminds me of my grandmother. I love it. And I've been to Cassadaga with my mother and a friend, and everyone should go to Cassadaga at least once. I mean, it's one of those Florida, oh my gosh, I want more. Like, I was sitting here going like, what? Go. Good job. I have to read it. I can't wait to read it.
Well, there's 2,000 more words at least.
It's been such a pleasure. And thank you so much for all that you do for our organization with True Stories, and for being a Renaissance woman in our community. And thank you for allowing me to interview you for Typewriter Talks.
Thank you for having me. This has been a blast. I appreciate it. You made it fun.
Oh, good. So thank you so much for joining us for Typewriter Talks. We'll be back next week, and we are Keep St. Pete Lit. We have writing classes, online writing classes currently, book clubs, true story, storytelling show, all types of events, and you can find it at keepstpetelit.org. So thank you so much, and everyone, please continue to read and write on.